everybody, it's Jonathan Fields with another episode of Good Life Project. My guest today is Leanne Ely. Leanne is a New York Times best-selling author of 8 books and the founder of a company that's on the verge of a movement called Saving Dinner. With over 100,000 people reading her daily dispatches, Leanne has grown Saving Dinner into a successful menu planning brand. She's also a syndicated newspaper columnist, host of her own radio shows. She has appeared on QVC, HGTV, ABC, and I'm sure many others that I don't know about. She's taught cooking classes for Bloomingdale's all over the country, and her syndicated column actually goes out to more than 250 newspapers. Awesome to be hanging out with you today.
You too, Jonathan.
I'm like, you've been everywhere, all over the place, every different medium. You've got a really fascinating brand. And whenever I see somebody who's sort of like, and you're passion driven about serving families and creating and sort of bringing back a set of values and health. And I'm always curious, I want to go into what you're doing in more detail, but I want to take a step back also. Because when I see somebody who's building something that's so passion driven and mission driven, I'm curious, where did it come from? So,
Where? It's funny because I grew up in a home where the dinner table was central, and we were expected to sit at the dinner table in the same places, and regardless of everything else that was happening, life stopped and we had dinner. My mother, I always say I was the original latchkey kid because I grew up in the 70s, and I had a working mom, but every week she would put a menu on our refrigerator with 2 magnets. She made a chore chart on who was going to help clean up after dinner, and there was just this ritual and this rhythm that happened in our home. And I loved that, and it was a very secure thing, and I felt like I belonged, and I felt like it was a wonderful thing, and I loved cooking, and I had a crazy English father who made all these crazy gourmet foods. He took me to Indian markets, and I learned how to make nasi goreng with him, and I ate frog's legs with him, and I was like 6 and 7 years old.
So you were the one kid in the block where people said, what do frog's legs taste like? You could actually
answer them like chicken, exactly, right? And then my mother was, of course, your standard cook. Everything was good, though. And it was just, this was a part of what our life was. And I loved to cook. I loved to be in the kitchen. I thought it was just, it was the heart of the home. I just migrated toward it, like this was something I had to do. And then later on in life, I noticed that, there was this disconnect between that part of family life that I so enjoyed and what was going on in the next generation of families, and I just thought, this is just wrong. And in between all of that, of course, I had my own catering business, and I catered to Saudi Arabian royalty, and I have a lot of crazy stories of cooking for celebrities, but that's another time. But the point is that this disconnect really bothered me, and I saw that it seemed like families were just a little bit off-center, and they didn't have that security of belonging. And I felt like that dinner table needed to be honored a little bit more, and we needed to treat that dinner table as if it was sacred and not just a place to launch the book bags and the junk mail. And so I wanted to take a step back and say, hey, remember when you came to the dinner table and you're expected to be in before the lights were on, and you can have that for your family too, because it's important. It's how you nurture and nourish the soul as well as the body.
So here's my curiosity. I mean, I have a lot of curiosities, but and a lot of different levels, both on sort of like the cultural phenomenon, the psychology of what it does to and for families, and also the entrepreneurial side. Just trying to pick where to go first here. But, one of the things that popped up immediately as you're talking is, did this awakening come to you at first more because you're starting to see what's happening out there, or were you experiencing this sort of like personally because you're an entrepreneur, right? You're building a catering company, you're building your own business, you're like a mom supporting a family,
right? Which
takes a lot of time and energy. Was this happening in your own family, or was this something that you always held dear in your own family, you saw more happening outside?
That's an excellent question. I saw it was a progressive thing, and I think, it's never, boom, every once in a while you get that kind of, 2x4 upside the head. Yeah. But this was one of those progressive things that I saw, like even in my 20s when I had a very successful catering business, and I watched the disconnect with the families. I mean, these were families that, we'd be doing weddings for, we'd be doing events for, and there was this disconnect, and moms would make these flip remarks like, oh, well, go heat up a Hot Pocket or something, and that was dinner. Or, these uber skinny women who don't eat dinner, they just eat the scraps off their kids' plate. I mean, I did have women tell me this. And I just thought, what happened to those days of sitting down and having dinner with your family? And I saw I just kind of started connecting the dots, and I thought, I think that's a missing piece that needs to be revisited. So it was a progressive thing. And then once I started having my own children, I was like adamant, no, we are sitting down at the dinner table. It was really easy not to. And you have to make that effort. So it was like, no, we are sitting down at this dinner table.
Yeah, I think it is so easy to move away from that, though. I mean, especially in this day and age, where people feel like the most precious commodity is time. People generally work longer hours. The workday has extended substantially. A lot of two-parent workers in a family. And if you're a single parent, very often you really have to work even extra hours. But it's interesting because when I was growing up, I was a young teenager in like the late 70s also. We had kind of a similar thing. My mom was a mad baker. She's an amazing cook. She also did all sorts of other things. She was a potter. She was an emergency, paramedic. She did she worked and she also, but we were, we spent a lot of time coming together around food. And it was, and looking back, it was just what we did. Like there was nothing magical. But then kind of looking forward, and then looking back from where I am now, there was something magical about it.
It was, exactly.
And to bake, and we had the chore sheet also. We knew he was setting the table and he was doing the dishes.
And you know how to set a table to this day,
right? Exactly, of course.
And there's kids today who don't.
Right, and it's funny now because my daughter will ask you which side, and I saw her that night she's holding her hands up like this, which side is left, to make sure that she's getting the fork on the right side. And but there's also, what's interesting to me is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more, but there's a certain magic in the food and magic in the coming together, but there's a certain magic in just the ritual.
Absolutely, and that's what the dinner table is. It is a ritual, and it's the comfort of seeing those traditions repeated over and over again, and it's knowing that, again, it's that little place at the table. That's your little place. That's where you belong, and you feel a part of something and a part of that little circle that sits at the table. And the food itself is very symbolic because it feeds heart and soul, and the hands that prepared it and everything about it that goes into that meal. The person who went out and purchased the food and the money that had to be made to bring it home. And we spend a lot of time feeding ourselves, really. Why don't we want to go back to that place where it's not just a matter of driving through someplace and shoving French fries in our mouth while we listen to horrible talk radio? Why don't we want to go to the place where we're really going to get something out of it and that we can stop and be in the moment? Because it is something that's so easy to brush aside, but it is that precious moment that we have with our families where we can build amazing relationships.
Yeah, and there's great research on the effect of this now also. Blanking on a whole bunch of them. The
CASA, Columbia University, did a huge study. That was just devastatingly amazing. And I'm not going to throw out statistics because I find them boring, but I will say that children who grow up in homes where they sit down at the dinner table are more likely to do well in school, be well adjusted, not have eating disorders, not drink, not smoke, not have premarital sex, not do drugs, not, all the stuff that you don't want your kid to do, and you're praying, oh, please, God, don't let that happen to my child. Well, your chances of that not happening are so much better when you provide that secure place. And like I said, making that dinner table sacred.
Yeah, and it's funny, there are so many things that you'll do outside of that to try and create that environment for your kids, not to go down all those other paths, including therapy, which if you need to do, you do. But I think it's just counterintuitive that something so seemingly simple could have such a profound effect.
And we skip the simple and go for the more complicated because that's how we're wired. We think, oh, you know, as entrepreneurs we do that. You know, new shiny object. That's what I want. I don't want to stay with what's working. I want to do something new and different and big. So we get into this place of putting our kids in 8 million activities. Well, it'd be great if they learn French by the time they're 6. And let's stick a baton lesson in here and some music, and don't forget the dance. And in the meantime, you got this kid who's being rushed through their childhood and missing just going outside and, you know, throwing a rock across the water and see how many times it can skip. Those simple things are gone. And we lose, I think, our lives into this complicated, convoluted mess of what we think we should be doing versus just falling back into the smaller, simpler things that have a huge impact on lives.
Yeah, I wonder whether so much of that is the way that we define success and how that's evolved over time. Because it's for a lot of parents, they value education, and everyone values education.
Sure. But
this is a phenomenon. We're sitting here in New York City filming today, and New York City is notorious. There have been books written in scathing columns in newspapers about how kids get tracked in preschool to go to Harvard. So it's like the preschool. There's a crazy rush to try and get your kid into certain preschools because they're a feeder for this elementary, and then a feeder into this middle, and feeder into this high school, which has like a higher likelihood of getting into this university, and it's all about sort of like the status, and then the status leads to money and prestige and power, and that's success, rather than just being happy.
Well, there's no school for that, right? There's no school of happiness.
Which comes largely from connection, like feeling that you're deeply connected, which brings us spiraling back to that dinner table as this daily ritual of connection and reconnection.
I think when we have those foundations built, and then there's that security in your child, and we can get off that hamster wheel of what the world, what New York City, what anybody is calling success, then we can bring our children to the place of having a good knowledge of themselves and knowing what their skills are and what their talents are. And if they don't want to go to Harvard or anywhere else, fine. But they want to be productive people, then I applaud that. I think we need to start redefining things a little bit more, and just coming back to a simpler place gives us that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, no, I love it. What's interesting too is there's at least in the worlds that I circle, and I'm curious in yours also, because you're much more sort of in touch on a daily basis with sort of like family dynamics, sort of on a much bigger level. There seems to be this yearning for the pendulum to swing back to a place of simplicity.
Of course. I mean, we all live in that Norman Rockwell fantasy.
Yeah,
we
right.
do.
I mean, and I think things have gotten so crazy for so many people that kind of like, I would give up a lot. I think a lot of people are saying that to themselves. I would give up a lot to go back to this place. And maybe not like the stifling of emotions and
certainly,
stuff, but just to like that simplicity of like a time of simplicity.
Right. Well, it's a choice too. Simplicity is a choice. It's never nobody's holding a gun to your head and say, put your kid in 6 activities. But we find ourselves, we worry about our children with peer pressure. We, as the parents and the adults, succumb to it just as much, and we're used to it. I mean, we've been in that rut for a long time. Right. And if you pull your kids out, you're like the weirdo. I did that. I am the weirdo. I did that. I said no. My children, my daughter was approached we lived on a horse farm at one point, and she was very talented on the horse. Well, you got to put your daughter in horse lessons, and she's perfect body for it. She could be a hunter jumper. She could do all this. Well, not only did I add everything up, but I thought, well, how fair is this to the rest of the family? There's 3 other people here, and that would mean that we'd all dedicate ourselves to her sport, including any extra money and everything else. And is that the thing to do? And I know that everybody just thought I was absolutely insane when I did that. And I also, another thing that I did is I said no to all the soccer and all the baseball and everything. We tried it, and it just made everything crazy, and it made my kids unhappy, me unhappy, and I felt like all I ever said is, hurry up, come on, we gotta go. Hurry up, come on, get in the car. Hurry up, let's go, let's go, let's go. And that became their lives. And so I stepped back, I homeschooled my kids. I took them to music lessons, in the middle of the day when everybody else was in school, and we lived on a little farm, and we had goats, chickens, and it was idyllic and beautiful. We'd go down to the pond. We had this little pond, and we'd bring out sketch pads, and we'd do these nature drawings, and we watched frogs get it on in the pond and make eggs. It was pretty awesome, but it was a choice that I made for simplicity, and it paid off. My children are both beautiful, creative adults now, and I just love being in their company, and their sense of humor is acutely funny, and they have a different observation of the world than most kids their age.
It's interesting. What's interesting also is that there seems to be a really growing interest in homeschooling now also.
Yes.
And I think a major shifting. I have a number of friends that actually do it, and a shift in perception of what it actually is, because there's a lot of mythology around. You're like, oh well, they won't socialize, they'll never, and in fact, from what I've seen, sort of like the latest information coming out of homeschooling is actually kids are incredibly well socialized, but they're socialized around people with genuine shared interests because they pick and choose those things where they want to engage in sort of like groups together, and I guess part of it is you end up in the actual school part of the day, far less of the day than you would if you were in normal school, which is sort of more adapted to
they spend more time waiting in line than learning.
Right, so you can actually spend a shorter window of time during sort of like basic structured lessons and more time really doing things that are just genuinely speaking to those things that light kids up, which is kind of an interesting, it pops into my head every once in a while.
Well, the myth of socialization in the homeschool community, just to speak to that, because I think it's an important thing to sort of, draw the line on. Socialization, kids don't have any problems socializing. They socialize better than any of us. They don't have all the preconceived things that we do, even as they grow older. Homeschool kids get to socialize with everybody of every different age. So if you take a socialized kid who've only socialized with kids their own age in little packs and gone all the way through, and then you take a socialized kid from homeschool who've been around kids from every age, from kindergartners to high schoolers, and then interacted well with adults, you'll just see a really well-rounded kid, and he's able to socialize in any situation. At least that's been my experience where I've seen that. Obviously there's going to be overlap either way, but I think it's a myth that kids who are in homeschool situations aren't socialized.
Yeah, and increasingly I've seen that same thing. I'm talking to friends also that just like, no, it's a complete fiction.
It is.
But from the outside looking in, it's counterintuitive until you actually really understand what homeschooling is. And I guess homeschooling is a catch-all phrase also, and there's so many different ways to do it now. I know friends that they have the kids in class on computer where they're taking lessons from the most amazing people around the world who are leading in their field. So anyway, we could go down the whole education thing for a while. I want to come back to what you're doing, and one of the big things I want to bring up, because we should talk about this. People hear our conversation about, well, yeah, it would be so great to have the family around dinner table to recreate that ritual. But I'm a single mom, I'm a single dad, or we're working insane hours, and we've got the nanny or the house, whoever's taking care, and there's no possible way that we can be home for this. Because I'm sure you've had to have had this conversation so many times with people. Tell me how this unfolds.
I keep going back to that same original premise that everything that we do is a choice. We can choose to have a nanny or not have a nanny. We can choose to have a crazy work schedule or not have a crazy work schedule. It's up to us. And one thing I know for sure, because, as a parent of 2 children in their early 20s, I look back and I think, I wish I'd fill in the blank, because those precious little years when they're so tiny, and those baby years and the toddler years, and then into elementary school when they become so interesting and funny and great to be around, and you want to eat them with a spoon because they're, the awkwardness is still kind of there, but it's, they're a little more independent. You're not doing the diapers and all that. But you don't get that back, and I don't care how many movies you take, and I don't care how many pictures you take, and they're family pictures in exotic locations. You choose. I drove a beat up Volvo for a lot of years, and I had to tell my in-laws, I'm not going to go to work. I'm going to stay home with my kids. I clipped coupons and I did what I had to do. And it was my choice. I'm not saying that every woman needs to make this choice, but it was my choice to be there and be present and to be in their lives. And I did what I had to do in order to make that happen. I chose that. And, I think I should have had that Volvo bronzed because that thing served me for a lot of years. But, we do what's important to us, and it's not so much what we say, it's what we do, And if the family dinner table is important, there's a way to work around it. There's a way to make it happen. And even if it's a picnic in the park and you've got to go back to the office, do it. You don't have to stop.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I find myself taking breaks for dinner.
Good for
and
you.
Then when my daughter and sometimes my wife go to sleep, if there's just more. And it's also, for me, I love what I do. So to me, work isn't work. It's just cool.
Yeah.
So I may just have stuff, so part of what I do is I'm a writer, where then I may spend a few hours just writing in quiet. But after, so that I can actually be there for that time. It doesn't always work out. I'm not perfect that way. I have the aspiration to be there. But what's interesting to me is it's occurred to me more recently that, and again, I can only speak for myself, that as I'm trying to figure out how to structure my time while my daughter's her age, she's like middle schooler now, that the world seems to, or at least maybe the circles in New York City, in like large cities in the United States, tend to work really, 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 really hard until you get your kids through college. And then you're like, that's the time where I get to pull back and have my life back. And it's interesting to me because I'm like, why wouldn't you work as much as you need to be okay, to put food on the table, to have an okay life, but also be present in the family, like with your kids, for whatever short window we have with them before they're off in college and then wherever it is with the rest of their lives. And then they're out of the house. Then, if there's a time to work, because people are like, well, at that point in my life, then I want to start to kick back. I'm like, you know what? I actually want to kick back with my kid now.
Yeah.
And then when she's out of the house, I'm cool if I have to work hard for another 20 years. And maybe again, it's because I actually really enjoy what I do. So I'm completely cool if I have to keep working hard doing that for the rest of my life, because why wouldn't I?
Right.
But we've got to reverse so that it's all like work hard and be away from the house until the kid's out of the house, and then kick back and be home more, rather than the reverse, which is like configure your working life around the ability to be home with the family as much as possible until they're out of the house, and then you'll have all the time in the world to work harder if you need to.
Of course.
To cover the college or whatever the expenses are. Maybe it's irrational. I don't really know, but it's something that's been spinning in my head lately.
I don't think it's irrational. I think it's smart, because I think we always think we have tomorrow. We always think, well, later I'm going to. It's the I'm going to. And you can just, all of a sudden, you're driving your child to their dormitory and dropping them off and having a meltdown in the middle of the dropping them off.
I don't even want to think about that.
Well, that was me.
Because I know I'm going to be a mess in the car.
Oh, you will. My daughter's getting married, so let me just tell you about it being a mess. I was reading Success magazine, of all things, on the plane on the way here, and this one guy is talking about the non-negotiables in his life. And one was working out, and one was not answering email before noon or something like that. And I thought, well, those are great work habits. We also need family and personal habits that are non-negotiable, and they're based on what our priorities are and what our values are. And so often we sacrifice our values and our insides and everything that we believe for a paycheck or a job. And I promise you that paycheck or job is not going to show up when you're sick and in the hospital, or you're, not doing well, but your child will, or your spouse will. And if we don't invest in them the same way that we invest our lives in our work, we're going to have fractured relationships there. It doesn't work any other way.
No. So let's talk about where all of this leads you. So you see this phenomenon happening here.
Right.
And you're in the food business at this point. You're like, you know how to actually, so at some point you feel like you need to do something.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story, of course, that goes with that, but I'd written my first cookbook. It was in 2000. I was on QVC selling it, and it did really well, and I got invited back a few times. And then I was asked to write a column for a woman who organizes online, Fly Lady. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but marvelous woman, and she and I became very good friends. And she said, "Listen, I can help people get organized." She said, "My husband and I always go out to dinner, so if I teach them how to clean up, you can teach them how to put dinner on the table." I said, "Deal." That time I was a friend. I was freelance writer, and I just had interviewed her because she'd had an impact in my life. And so that's basically how it started. And then all of a sudden, I put this menu, recipes, and shopping list together. Everybody wanted it, and I thought, well, I can't do that every week. And then I thought, well, if I charge for it, I can. And so that's how my business was born. And it's just so funny because, my whole career has been about putting food on the table for either, large banquets or, when I was in college, I waited tables. I'm always putting food on the table somehow. And then doing this for, thousands and thousands of women and mostly women, I should say, not all, but for thousands and thousands of families every week is, it's been quite an experience.
So you create essentially a business where it's menu planning, dinner menu planning.
A subscription menu plan.
Right.
Yeah. For 13 years.
Right. When you started doing this, but it was really just, let me do it for
It was just me.
The column.
Oh, now I've got tons of competition, but I sort of, Reader's Digest said I'm the mother of menu planning, whatever that means.
Funny.
Yeah, that was years ago.
So it's taken off. You have thousands of people who you're serving. So now it's not, does it change it for you? So on the one hand, awesome, you get to impact thousands of people and thousands of families now. Does it change it at all for you that you're not the one actually creating, like serving somebody right in front of you? Was there a certain amount, because you get that exchange of energy, whether it's somebody in a restaurant or your family, or do you get that same sort of thing saying, I'm enabling that? Do you get the same thing from that, in thousands of people?
I really do, and now we have a team that creates our menus and recipes and our shopping lists, and we have a whole system. We have somebody who's the manager of our menu production team and everything. It's certainly evolved since I started this 13 years ago. I look at every single recipe still and make sure that it's got the Leanne stamp of approval on it. I want to make sure. And so that's sort of my way of, touching everything and almost cooking for them. I always say I'll do everything except shop, and cook. I can't. But I can empower and enable people to do that themselves and give them the tools. And sometimes I think that being the teacher is more empowering and more thrilling, and I'm more passionate about than actually doing it myself anymore. But every night I still make dinner at home, and I enjoy it, and it's never going to go away.
No, I love that. Talk to me about the idea of how changes in ideas about healthy eating affect what you do and how you serve.
Well, it's interesting because, healthy eating once upon a time just meant, when I started this, it was watch for, make sure you get low fat, it was making the old standard family fare a little more healthier. That was my whole deal.
Margarine instead of butter.
Well, no, never
Right.
margarine. No.
We'll never hit the table.
Me and Julia Child, we bring sticks of butter to me, and I'll be a happy girl. No, I never went that far, but I did, I was like, do non-fat, low-fat, and all this other kind of stuff. And of course, as time goes on and as the research comes in, nutrition knowledge changes.
Right.
And as a nutritionist, I've kept up on it, and I've changed and evolved some things myself. I've had my own personal health crises, and so I've really changed the way that I eat. So I share that, and I don't say everybody needs to do this. And I always tell everybody, you've got your own inner nutritional guru who will tell you what to do if you listen. For me, this is what's working for me. And so I do have a lot of people who will follow and do what I'm doing, but I still offer everything else, because there's certain people have their own ways of doing things. And who am I to say this is the way it needs to be done? I rebel against that kind of thing. So I just offer all the different ways of eating, and you choose it for yourself, what works for you.
So you kind of say, okay, well, there are different, like, no matter what approach that I'm taking, there's something that's going to allow me to make this work. Right.
And there's also one thing that I do, and you said earlier, things have changed, and now I'm just very adamant to please don't eat GMOs, please don't do that. And here's all the information. Here are some people and some experts that you can learn from. We started a whole webinar series with different health experts that we brought in, like Jeffrey Smith we just had a fantastic interview. We've had, so many different people who've come in and have really shared their vision of what health is and what we can do and how to empower the family. And the whole reason for that is to educate. It's not just enough anymore to just throw dinner on the table. You need to know what you're putting on the table. And years ago when we started, it was just, just do this healthy thing and you'll be fine. And now I'm adamantly saying, you really need to go organic. You really need to watch for those GMOs. And by the way, I hate to tell you, but wheat's not healthy. So, I give the information, and it's yours to choose to use it or not.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had your own personal health crisis. Are you open to sharing?
Sure. Well, 10 years ago, I went through a very traumatic divorce, and I ended up with a crippled thyroid. And I gained 30 pounds in 3 months. And my face was as round as a moon. And I went to the doctor and I said, something's not right here. And she just looked at me like, well, sister, you've had way too many pizzas. And I said, will you please check my thyroid? And of course they checked it and everything was completely crazy. And later on I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disorder where the antibodies attack your thyroid to destroy it. So, that puts you on a medication for life and a journey of, all these different health issues, weight issues, and it's crisis management, really, when you're in the trenches of it. And, I started to get, better, but I noticed that as I got rid of certain things in my life, certain food in my life, I felt even better. I dropped the weight. I was feeling normal again. And so, I went essentially paleo. And we all know about the paleo diet these days, cavemen stuff. But it really made a difference. And for, having an autoimmune disease, it meant that I needed to really watch everything that I ate.
Right.
So.
So it's fascinating to just kind of see how your own sort of personal experience, unpleasant as it was, starts to advise, okay, a sense of ownership in terms of what you put out into the world, and okay, it's not just about menus anymore.
Right.
I need to give people more. It's more about education. And again, I like the approach where it's like, I'm not going to tell you you have to do this, but I'm going to bring you the information so that at least it's in front of you, and that I can't make the choice for you, but I can tell you what's the latest information that we have.
Yeah, it's an equipping, it starts at the dinner table equipping your children. They learn so many things They learn manners, how to set a table. They learn to eat healthier foods. They learn a lot of things at the table. They even learn how to cook if you bring them into the kitchen. They learn how to shop if you take them to the store. It's all about equipping your child. And then later on, it's about, for me, it was equipping my readers so they have the education and the information so they can choose what they want to do.
Yeah, love it.
Same
so, where are you going with this now? Like, what's the next big thing on the horizon for you?
Well, we are in the midst of a whole Take Back the Dinner Table campaign and a movement. We started this, it was a weird dream that I woke up literally in the middle of the night and just went, you know what's going on here is there are people who don't know and have enough information, and not everybody's on board, and I want everybody to be on board and understand about the threat to our food supply with the GMO issue, for one, and the threat to how our kids are being advertised to, and the problem that we have with just the big food and the big pharma and all the junk that's going on out there. And the more I knew about it, the more outraged I was about it. But I'm not the one. I'm just this little menu planning chick with a website, right?
Not exactly, but
that, well, who am I to start a movement? But I thought, I've brought families back to the dinner table for years. Now I got to teach them to take it back and to take back what's rightfully theirs, and that they need to be vocal and they need to know exactly what it is that they're eating. And it's not just enough to have a little webinar, where you get lucky enough to have Jeffrey Smith come and educate people and you have a few thousand people show up. We need a movement, and we need to get everybody on board, and we need to do something wild and crazy. And so I said, who better to do it than me? So Take Back the Dinner Table is being kicked off in Q2 of 2014. And we are starting with a bus tour. And the bus is wrapped with our Take Back the Dinner Table logo. And we're going to go from town to town through the United States. We're putting all of that together right now. We've got country musicians signed to go, and I'm not allowed to say who anybody is, but you'll know the names. We have people who are giving like small TED Talks. We're going to feed people. Life Kitchen is going to be providing a food truck.
Fabulous.
And we are going to be giving out swag bags with solutions that show people how it is to make sure you're not eating GMOs. We've got the non-GMO shopping guide. Mm-hmm. We've got another big food company that we're pretty sure is going to come with me. I'm not at liberty to say who it is right now, but we have gotten some big sponsorships and some big things happening, and we're getting ready to go with our Kickstarter campaign here shortly. So
that's exciting. That's incredible.
It's crazy.
So, I mean, it's funny because this starts as basically like one column, or like a quick little thing that was just supposed to be like one thing, and it grows into this thing which now affects thousands and thousands of people, and now the evolution. And I love the idea of who am I? But then you kind of circle around to the fact that every movement as a general rule was started by someone.
Yeah.
And maybe it's someone with a lot of connections and a huge voice, but a lot of times it's somebody who just had the will to make it happen and wouldn't say no.
Well, what happened too, I think, when you don't say no and you're open and you talk about it and you believe in it and people see your fire and your passion, it attracts.
They rally behind you,
I had an entertainment company say, okay, we're on board, we'll do this, and they put up 6 figures, and we've already started the documentary, and we're doing a pilot for TV as well. Why not?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And, we've talked about movement dynamics and all that.
Oh, I know.
It's just, it's amazing to see when there's a sense. It's like when you're starting to act just so aligned with your beliefs and your essence, you start to radiate, and people want that.
Yeah.
You become magnetized, and people it's intoxicating in a certain way, and people want to be around people who are in that place. I think in part because they believe in you and they want to bask in that, and they want to be a part of it. And also because it's so rare, which is kind of a sad thing.
Yeah, that's the truth. I think it's rare, and I think it's also an opportunity to connect with something that's real. You know, we get so lost in the shuffle of everyday life, and we lose ourselves on the most important things, which are those small moments, you know, that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And those small moments, that to me is what life is. Those are the cherished times. It's not the Christmas, it's not the big wedding, it's not all of that. It's just those really small moments. And I believe Take Back the Dinner Table is a movement to go back to grabbing those small moments back and just really enjoying just the very root of what a good life is.
Which is the perfect segue. Like you set me up.
I just did set you up, didn't I? That was on purpose. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. So the name of this is the Good Life Project. And so when I offer that term to you, to live a good life, what comes up for you?
Absolutely savoring those small moments. And I don't know why this is almost making me cry. Isn't that weird? I think it has to do with my daughter getting married, but I really believe that a good life isn't about the big things. It's not about the stellar career. It's not about the corner office. It's not even about having a successful business. It's about holding your child's hand and cherishing those small things. I don't know where this came from, but a good life is absolute gratitude, right down to your toenails, that you have that, and that you have those moments, and that everything counts. All of those small things count. That's a good life.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's a great conversation.
Oh, it's great. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. So my guest today has been Leanne Ely. I'm Jonathan Fields, signing off for Good Life Project.